This is the September 28th, 9th meeting of the Portland City Council. Would you please call the roll?
Saltzman, Novick, Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Hales.
Here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for patience and flexibility. We have 2 items left over from yesterday's council calendar that we're going to take up this afternoon. If you go ahead and read them both, please. 1081 and 1082.
1081, Title 11, Trees, Urban Forestry Trust Funds 2016 Report, and 1082, Authorize an intergovernmental agreement between Portland Parks and Recreation and Portland State University to develop a citywide tree planting strategy.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. Portland Parks and Recreation has a large, we offer lots of services that Portlanders value, and one of them is the urban forest by planting trees citywide. Title 11, the Tree Code, became effective in January of 2015 and established a tree planting and preservation trust fund. Item 1081 is the required annual report of Tree Code trust funds. Portland Parks and Recreation City Forester Jen Cairo will present the report, which includes the revenue and expenditures of 2 trust funds. These trust funds are the only resources dedicated by the City Code to one of Portland's most treasured assets, trees. As Jen will explain, these funds are generated through the collection of mitigation fees, penalty fees, and fees in lieu of planting. And these funds do not come from the city's general fund.
Great. Thank you,
With that,
Jen.
I will introduce Jen Cairo, City Forester.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. Mayor. And I will introduce Dr. Vivek Chandas. He's a professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University and also an urban forestry commissioner. And he'll be doing part of the presentation today in regards to the intergovernmental agreement. So we are reporting today to Council on the Title 11 Urban Forestry Trust Funds as required. And we'll also be requesting your approval of an ordinance to finalize a partnership with Portland State University for development of a citywide tree planting strategy using some of these trust funds. First, we will describe the 2 funds established by Title 11 and their permitted uses. We'll give balances and expenditures for both of the funds, and then describe how those expenditures were used. We will describe our work to develop a citywide tree planting strategy. And finally, we'll request that Council accept the report and approve the ordinance for the strategy. And we're presenting these items together because they both pertain to the Urban Forestry Trust Funds. Title 11 Trees established 2 trust funds for urban forestry. The specific code sections are 11.15. And those 2 funds are the Urban Forestry Fund and the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund. These 2 funds have different sources, funding sources, and have different uses. Both are administered by the city forester, and the balances are carried over beyond the fiscal year. The first I'll talk about is the Urban Forestry Fund. Funds into the Urban Forestry Fund are restoration fees, civil penalties, or civil remedies, so penalty fees that are due to violations of city code involving city and street trees. City trees, to remind you, are trees that are on city-owned property, and street trees are specifically city-owned trees that are in city rights-of-way, and in this case, that's distinguished from private trees. So private penalties do not go into the Urban Forestry Fund. The uses of the fund include replacing, establishing, maintaining city or street trees that have been illegally removed or damaged, planting, establishing, maintaining city or street trees, funding urban education, urban forestry education, outreach, technical assistance, and also funding other general forestry-related activities. This fund can also receive voluntary contributions as well. The second of the 2 new trust funds under Title 11 is the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund. Its source is primarily mitigation fees. It also receives restoration fees for enforcement actions regarding private trees, and it also can receive voluntary contributions. Mitigation fees for trees is payment in partial compensation for the value of the public asset and community services lost when the tree was cut down. And an example of when mitigation fees might be generated is in a private property development situation in certain zoning areas of the city on certain property sizes. 1/3 of the trees on that property that are not exempt from the code can be retained, or the property developer may choose to remove them and would pay mitigation fees for those trees that are removed. And you've all heard quite a bit about that in the recent past, I think. The funds may be used for planting trees on public or private property in the same watershed where it was collected, and I'll speak more to that in a minute. It can also be used for purchasing conservation easements for perpetual retention of trees and tree canopy, and it can be used to acquire land permanently where there are existing trees. Title 11 requires expenditure of the tree planting and preservation fund in the watersheds in which they were collected. The strategy that we are going to create for citywide tree planting will reflect this watershed distribution requirement. The map here shows where mitigation and penalty payments were collected from the start of Title 11 in January of 2015 through the end of the last fiscal year, June 30th. Planning for and planting trees is a multi-year undertaking, while the fund revenue changes on a weekly, if not daily, basis. Therefore, to meet this requirement, we tracked the funds collected by watershed and calculated each watershed's percent of the whole. We'll use these proportions to guide planting and establishment expenditures from the fund for the next few years and then recalculate again. So at this point, the distribution that we have is 19% in the Columbia watershed, 8% in the Fano and Tryon Creek watersheds, those are grouped together in the code, 17% in the Johnson Creek watershed, and 56% in the Willamette watershed. Moving on to fund revenue. Revenue accumulated by the two funds since the beginning of Title 11 implementation to the end of fiscal year 15-16, so again, June 30th. In the Urban Forestry Fund, there's a total of $11,650, and in the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund, $677,000. You'll notice that the first 6 months of code implementation, there were no penalty fees generated. And you might recall that during the initial implementation of the tree code, we focused on outreach and communicating permit requirements rather than enforcement, so there were no penalty fees collected because penalties were not pursued. And you'll also notice that the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund is significantly larger than the Urban Forestry Fund, and that's due to the fact that enforcement fees and donations are a lot less frequent than mitigation payments. So tree mitigation payments are by far the largest source of revenue to these funds, and as Commissioner Fritz noted earlier, these are the only dedicated funds for us to use for tree planting and other tree activities. In this expenditures table, you'll see that there were no expenditures for the same time period from the Urban Forestry Fund, and that from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund, a total of $85,683 were expended. That leaves a balance of $11,650 in the Urban Forestry Fund and $591,317 in the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund. And you'll notice there on that lower part of the slide the asterisk. Just to give a general frame of reference for how much tree the remaining funds in the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund might get us, it would buy about 1,354 street trees, planting and establishing them for the next 3 years. It should be noted that there are many variables influencing the unit cost of tree planting, so this is really just to give you a concept. It could change a lot. These expenditures were mostly for materials and supplies, things like tree stock, also in some cases labor. And what we did with the expenditures from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund was they helped to plant and establish 2,562 trees citywide. These trees were planted by Parks and Urban Forestry with partners. 93% of those trees planted during this time period were large form, evergreen, or native species. And that's a positive and important measure because these tree types return the greatest services to the community over their lifetimes by far. And for this reason, planting these tree types is a specific goal in the city's current urban forest management plan. Most of the trees planted were in 52 different developed parks and in 20 natural areas across the city. And the lower half of the slide, the example and the photo there is from our Learning Landscapes program. And this is one example of how some of these funds were expended in the past period. The Learning Landscapes program is an ongoing program that's been in existence for quite a while, and it establishes schoolyard arboreta with kids planting the trees. It also has a curriculum component that teaches students about trees, the functions of trees, and hopefully builds some tree appreciation among the next generation of Portlanders. After the trees are planted by the kids, Urban Forestry and the Youth Conservation Crew tree team provide establishment care for those trees for the next 3 years. Thus far, 5 districts in the city have been involved in the Learning Landscapes program over the duration of its existence. Those are David Douglas, Portland Public Schools, Centennial, Reynolds, and Park Rose. The program's open to all districts, and we also work with charter and alternative schools. And you'll see here that not many trees were planted compared to 2,562 trees. There were only 72, but we had 600 participants. So this is a great example of where we're connecting kids with nature, and a lot of the measurement of the success of the program is how many kids we actually get engaged. Okay, now we're shifting towards what will be coming with the trust funds. And we've begun an undertaking to develop a citywide tree planting strategy. And the strategy, will give us a plan for how best to use the resources in the most effective and strategic way for planting trees across the city. So basically, how to get the most bang for our buck. And to date, we haven't spent a lot of the trust funds because we wanted a good plan in place for using them first. Our goal in creating the strategy is to distribute tree canopy services equitably to all residents in the city, to plant high service trees and prioritize the areas with the most need, and plant trees that are sustainable, will survive and flourish for many years to come. We'll also be looking at air quality and other public health connections to trees in the urban forest, where the urban forest can improve public health. And we'll be also looking at environmental justice factors. We're interested in applying the most up-to-date best management practices, and of course, expanding the tree canopy across the city, which has been a long-standing goal for the city. We also recognize that urban forests provide quantifiable services to city residents, and that since our forest is inequitably distributed, some areas are underserved. In general, less affluent areas of Portland tend to have fewer trees, and this is a long-standing pattern in spite of significant tree planting efforts to date. We'll be working on this tree planting strategy in partnership with Portland State University. Professor Shandas Vivek has dedicated graduate students who'll be working on the project, and also his lab, the Portland State Sustaining Urban Places Lab, has extensive support and expertise that they can provide, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. So the ordinance before you for potential approval is to provide $50,000 from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund to support the creation of the citywide tree planting strategy. And the deliverable that the ordinance would provide for is completion of the strategy itself, the plan, that will be ready for initial implementation starting next winter, fiscal year 17-18, and for ongoing use thereafter. And now I'll turn it over to Vivek.
Hello, thank you, Commissioners, Mayor Hales. A little bit about us. I think more than anything else, this project epitomizes Portland State's motto, let knowledge serve the city, and our lab has been trying to do this exact thing for almost a decade now, and we are really well positioned, at least is the case that I'd like to make, for doing this work, in part because we've been working extensively across numerous bureaus. We have ongoing climate collaborations with Bureau of Planning Sustainability, ongoing connections with the Water Bureau, other collaborations with Bureau of Environmental Services, and of course with forestry. And so this extensive amount of engagement that we've had has really given us a much better insight into the way the city operates, the way decisions are being made, and where we want to position ourselves in terms of being able to use the data and the students and other resources that we have for being able to develop this tree planting strategy. We've to date already invested over $100,000 in work looking at Portland's canopy and starting to really characterize in a very systematic way where we have canopy, where we don't, and which communities are benefiting and being challenged by this canopy. The specific project itself, the strategy we expect to take to develop this strategy is one that looks at really the best practices across the country. We want to make sure we leave no rock unturned, and looking at how other cities are expanding their canopy and looking at how they're really addressing a lot of these equity concerns that pretty much is a systematic pattern we've noticed across cities in the U.S. This leads into a plan evaluation process that's a pretty tried and true approach in the planning literature that allows us to look at specific strategies as well as goals that these strategies are trying to address. The evaluation looks not only at other cities, but what we expect to do is an inward look as well, and looking at the numerous plans that actually interact with the urban forest. Right now, as far as we can tell, the numerous plans that are currently effective in the city are very disparate in terms of how they effectively address the urban canopy. And what we really want to do is, again, create a systematic approach that aligns numerous plans that the city has committed to. This includes a comprehensive plan, the urban forestry management plan, the climate action plan, the preparedness plan, and so on. We are looking to get a lot of input from stakeholders. These are folks in the bureaus themselves, as well as community stakeholders. And another resource we expect to bring to this is what's called a LIDAR spatial analysis data set, which the city has already committed some money to with Metro and several other jurisdictions in the area to fly a plane in 2014 to collect a tremendous amount of very high-resolution data of the city. Our lab essentially processed those data over the last year and have now, never before, a digital surface model of the city that shows essentially where there are spaces for planting, both in public and private spaces, and to use these data to be very careful about how we go about identifying locations in terms of a plantable strategy, a planting strategy. To do this, we've found that a lot of tree planting in the city, and most cities, frankly, occur very opportunistically. And while there's a lot of advantages to that, we find that there might be a systematic bias introduced in terms of where the trees end up. And as Jen was mentioning just moments ago, there is a clear distinction across sociodemographics and presence of tree canopy. So how we go about creating a systematic approach versus an opportunistic approach will really allow us to be far more strategic about where we put trees and have a defensible idea as to why we are putting them there. Working with community groups and bringing in a number of considerations that are effective in the biophysical, the social, as well as the policy and institutional dimensions, I think will be instrumental in creating such a integrated plan for linking the people with the landscapes they inhabit. With that, I'll turn it over back to Jen to conclude the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek. Trees are essential city infrastructure for the services they provide to all of us. Contributions of our urban forest include things like cleaning our air, reducing high summer temperatures, which we now call urban heat island effect, improving the health of residents, managing our stormwater on site, making more livable, walkable, connected, and beautiful communities, and that list goes on. The dollar value of those services was estimated to be around $5 billion per year in Portland in the early 2000s. That's now an old figure, and we'll be updating that valuation soon. However, it still gives us a useful frame of reference for the importance of our trees in the city. So this is a photo of one of our neighborhoods that is relatively easily recognized from above. In earlier, less treed days, the Stumptown days. Today, Ladd's Addition looks very different. Today, trees are also a remarkable part of Portland's identity, which distinguishes our city from others nationwide. And today we know that the city's forest is inequitably distributed. Residents in tree-deficient neighborhoods receive fewer services from our city's forest. Often these neighborhoods are home to residents that really need those services. Changing this pattern takes special effort. And we now have an exciting new opportunity to grow our forest in strategic and sustainable ways and to maximize the services trees provide to us. It's a real opportunity to deliver those services to future generations of residents, no matter where they live in the city. And we request that Council accept the trust funds report and approve the ordinance to establish the IGA with Portland State University and Dr. Shondas for $50,000 to partner on development of a citywide tree planting strategy. Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions? Great presentation, great partnership. Thank you very much. Anyone else like to speak on either of these items? If not, then,
move to accept the report.
is there a second? Let's then do that. Let's adopt the report, please.
Thank you for that presentation, and thank you, Dr. Chandras, not only for partnering with us on this, but also for serving on the Urban Forestry Commission. I really appreciate your input, and it's exciting to be able to quantify what we're seeing and explain why we need trees in a very data-driven way. So thank you very much. Aye.
Fish,
Thank you both. Aye.
Schultzman,
Thank you. Aye.
Hale.
You know, whether it's partnerships like the one that we have with Friends of Trees or now with Portland State, or individuals, I remember going out and tacking up some of the first historical tree plaques with Jane Glazer. You know, it's really it's become a community effort, not just a community asset, although it's obviously a very important asset. And I love that about what's happened to the urban forest. Yes, of course, it's much better that Ladd's Addition looks like that now than it did then, but we also have a lot more people engaged and that really care about this. So I really appreciate that evolution, and this is a good part of that. So thank you for working well together. Aye. And then the ordinance will pass to second reading next week and be adopted then. Thank
And if
you.
I might also just mention, draw people's attention to an op-ed that Jim Labby, formerly with the Audubon
Oh, yeah.
Society, wrote into the Street Roots last time. It's
Okay, I didn't see that.
very interesting analysis of the issue about affordable housing and trees, which you also just showed us. Thank you.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to this afternoon's time certain item, which is two paired items, 1089 and 1090, please.
1089, accept Portland Utility Board annual reports, and 1090, amend Portland Utility Board code to increase the number of board members, change quorum requirement, and ex officio member term.
Commissioner Fish.
Thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, today I have the honor of introducing the Portland Utility Board, which will be presenting its first annual report to the council. In May of last year, this council established the PUB based on the recommendation of a Blue Ribbon Commission Mayor Hales and I established. We asked the Blue Ribbon Commission, chaired by former U.S. Attorney Dwight Holton, to help us rethink public oversight of our two utilities. Today, we will hear from PUB members about their experience during this inaugural year. Over the past year, I've witnessed the PUB do a lot of learning, immersing themselves in the operations and budgets of two large and complex infrastructure bureaus. They established bylaws and today are proposing several structural tweaks to help them operate more efficiently and effectively. In a short amount of time, they have brought a fresh perspective to our decision-making on policy and budget issues. I'm grateful for the thoughtful, independent feedback we've received from them so far and for their service. Here to tell us more are PUB co-chairs Kendra Smith and Alan Warman. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members and Mr. Mayor. I'm Alan Warman. I'm the co-chair, and this is my fellow co-chair, Kendra Smith, to my right. We are here today to submit the first annual report, but we will also want to add some context. Our investment by the board enables us to act as an effective advocate for the citizens of Portland. This investment by the board includes a very broad understanding of utility management, bureau operations, and the city budget process. PUB's first year was a very intensive examination of these areas. The PUB members worked with the bureau staff to build a foundation of understanding of these operations and the financing of both these bureaus. As the bureaus are large and complex, this learning will continue throughout our second year. But the investment of all parties has resulted in a very strong foundation to this board. It will be very good going forward as well. We've built a structure of engagement through the budget process, beginning with early briefings of the Bureau's financial plans, rate forecasts, operations, and the capital investment plan proposals, including the participation in council sessions and the mayor budget meetings. All investments take resources, and the success of this foundation building year couldn't have happened without really dedicated resources and so many people. Bureau staff, with the direction and support of top leadership, included Mike and Mike, Jonas, Cecilia, Jeff, Susan, and everybody else on their staff. And also a special note to say that our analyst, Melissa Merrill, added phenomenal support throughout the year. Also, Commissioner Fish and his staff, including Jim and Liam, were very helpful. Also, past board members, Michael Harrison and Gwen Johnson, who in addition to our current members, also dedicated their time to the successful pub first year. We look forward to adding value to the conversation of investing in the capital infrastructure and operations of both bureaus, with an eye toward balancing system needs, risk, resource constraint, and helping the bureaus make tough choices. Our budget letter submitted to you in February, we expressed an interest in being an engaged partner in those processes. The pub is very encouraged to see BES including us in its strategic planning process. Next week, Don Uchiyama, who's the Assistant Director of BES, will be giving the pub an update of the initial work that has been done to date, and we look forward to working with the bureaus over the fall to provide feedback. The Water Bureau will be engaging in a similar process in the coming years, and pub really looks forward to being engaged in their strategic planning process as well. Also in the pub budget letter, the pub raised concerns about funding processes for council's commitments to Mount Tabor and the proposed biogas project at BES. Pub was very happy to see the council's funding last year that covered a portion of the Tabor work from the general fund, and we expect that the ongoing costs will be funded in the same manner. The Bureau took Pub and the Citizens Utility Board's concern about the biogas project and have continued to refine their analysis and work plan. The pub continues to follow the biogas project, and our staff has attended several meetings with Bureau staff and CUB as the planning process continues forward. The Water Bureau is in the midst of a corrosion control study and potential changes to the regulatory requirements for water testing, treatment, and communication. The Water Bureau has briefed the pub about the ongoing conversations with regulators and encourages them to continue the open dialogue and engage pub as decisions are being made to the current operations. In regards to affordability, the pub continues to encourage the bureaus to address the affordability in a holistic and integrated manner. The pub recognizes the guidance of Commissioner Fish that he provided to the bureaus during the budget process last year, and the work that his office continues to do with the bureaus to identify ways throughout the budget process to reduce rate increases and lower that have been lower than the initial expectations. Pub hopes to see this process continue for the coming year and will work with the commissioners and bureaus to further identify ways to balance resources, risk, service levels so we can make difficult choices. We want to basically make our utilities effective and most affordable for all the Portland residents. Kendra?
Great. Thanks, Alan. I'm going to cover communications, public engagement, and the proposed adjustments to the code. So regarding council communications, as you know, one reason the pub's creation was occurred was the public perception that decisions were being made that maybe weren't in the best interest of utility customers. Openness and transparency to convincing the public that Portland takes its promise to do things differently is critical. As the commissioners, you're tasked with the unenviable job of prioritizing many competing needs in the city with constrained resources. When issues arise that affect the Utility Bureau, the pub welcomes the opportunity to work with council to ensure proper public process and vetting for the utility-related projects and issues. In order for the pub to be successful in providing this service, we rely on you to engage us in those decisions early and allow us enough time to secure meaningful input from the public. As far as what we've attempted to do on public engagement, our staff has worked to set a base of communication and through management of a public website and information sharing. Going forward, we've directed pub staff to increase awareness of the pub as a resource for Portland residents. This includes broadening our outreach for filling member vacancies and increasing outreach to the community groups for meeting notices. We're looking for a crowd, waiting for the crowd. We know that only comes with the controversy. In terms of vacancies, related to filling vacancies, we also ask for your help in identifying and recommending candidates for board membership. The Blue Ribbon Commission recommended, and you agreed, for the pub, in order for the pub to be successful, it needs to have members with diverse backgrounds, skills, and experience. And we really need your help to move forward to get a broad pool of candidates to serve the pub. And I'll explain that a little bit further when we talk about the number of pub members we're looking at to make an adjustment to. So as far as adjustments to the code, as part of our annual review process, we identified 2 areas in the code that we're asking you to amend. The first clarifies the terms of ex officio members, and the second is the expansion of our membership. While the pub was created as a year-round entity, the ordinance that established the pub states that ex officio members' terms end when the city council approves the proposed budget. And it's unclear when those members actually begin their term. We found through this first year the wisdom of having ex officio members on the board, and their role is valued year-round. These members are an incredible resource, offering staff-level insight into the Bureau's activities. And of course, as you know, the budget process really is year-round. So the ordinance for your consideration this afternoon would clarify the language that ex officio's terms would be for 1 year and with a limit of 3 terms. And then regarding expansion of pub membership, we're asking you to consider an increase in the number of voting members from 9 to 11. And the reason for this is that serving on the pub requires a substantial amount of time commitment. This can lead to challenges in attendance and may influence the level of turnover in the pub. In the first year, we had 2 members resign due to time commitments and conflicts, with just how many meetings and the demand with different subgroups meeting and et cetera. In addition to the time commitment, the bureaus are large, complex entities, and it takes substantial investment for board members to establish their knowledge foundation, to provide oversight and engage with the bureaus in the city in an effective manner. So in recognition of these challenges, the pub requests an amendment to the city code to increase the size of the pub from 9 to 11 members, which is consistent with the Blue Ribbon Commission's recommendation. This will expand the pool of established members to account for that potential turnover.
In closing, the first year was an investment year that has resulted in a very strong foundation of knowledge on which we can rely upon and build upon this coming year. The pub has a clear plan on further engaging with the bureaus during this upcoming budget cycle and provide the council with more detailed advice and recommendations that we could build upon from last year. We definitely welcome your input and look forward to working with you. And we respectfully and happily submit this first annual report of the Portland Utility Board, and we're also happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions for our two lead volunteers here?
Thank you very much, and it's a huge commitment. I may have been on vacation when this came back, but I'm wondering about the issue of terms and staggering of terms. When we set it up, you were going to decide who was going to get the 1, 2, and 3 year terms. So what's happening with that?
They are staggered.
We are staggered.
Now
Yes.
staggered. Okay.
We are staggering, primarily because of the issue with the depth of knowledge that, you spend these years trying to establish, so it's really important to have staggered terms. I don't know exactly who is on what schedule, but we can certainly get that to you.
Did it? Yes.
Yes, it has occurred, and Melissa knows exactly who is serving what terms.
And how did we come down on term limits? Thank you.
Good question.
You mentioned that you would like to see more crowds at your meetings and that we could help you in that regard.
Careful what you wish for.
And do you have some ideas about controversies we could stir up that would be the most advantageous in terms of? But seriously, that's that may be one of my favorite lines
Yeah,
of all
right,
time
yeah.
over 8 years. Because two things have changed. One is, I think I can speak for my colleagues in saying this is the best report we've had from an independent oversight body of our utilities during that period of time. And second, the fact that the room isn't packed with people and we're not enmeshed in controversy says something about the path that we're on. It doesn't mean we don't make decisions sometimes that maybe are slightly close to the line or over the line. And I have, of course, a respectful disagreement about something that's currently pending. But I think there has been a sea change, and I appreciate particularly that you acknowledge that in the last budget, the mayor used general fund money to cover the costs of Mount Tabor historic improvements. There were a lot of competing claims on that money, and the mayor could have gone a number of different ways, and I am extremely pleased that in his proposed budget, he did put the money from the general fund toward that purpose, and I would hope that future councils continue to follow that lead.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thanks very much. Anyone else here to speak on these two items?
We have a couple of, I think, the League of Women Voters and the Citizens Utility Board is here. Who else, Carla?
Come on.
That's all who I had signed up.
So Janice Thompson from the Citizens Utility Board here, and Debbie Iona from the League of Women Voters are here to give us some testimony.
But Mr. Robinson wanted to
Yes,
testify
I
also.
think he does too.
And Mr. Robinson, our visiting friend. Janice, why don't you kick us off?
Janice Thompson, Citizens Utility Board of Oregon. And also proud to say, an attendee at, I think, every single pub meeting and all but 2 subcommittee meetings, and even there, I had a colleague cover for one. So very pleased to be, working with the pub several times. I've initiated, joint meetings with the pub staff person. There was a mention of the biogas issue that, I focus on with the council in the last budget round, and that is definitely an issue that I think because of timing, I was kind of focused on first, but it's, I think, now a good partnership between CUB and pub. The pub's charge, is to provide oversight of the city council's management of these 2 public utility bureaus. They are complex, and so the group faced a steep learning curve that is now significantly less steep due to the group's hard work. But, there's going to be ongoing learning needs, and as has been noted, there are going to be some new pub members, and so I think something to think about, for them to think about for the next year and beyond, is providing an orientation and coaching, as new members come in. CUB supports the two ordinance amendments. As a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission, I actually supported recommending an 11-member group, just given that it seemed like a really big job and more hands on deck could come in handy. There were valid concerns, though, on the part of the BRC about getting enough applicants, which is why the Blue Ribbon Commission recommendation was this 9 or 11, and I certainly understood last summer why the 9 option offered by the BRC was recommended. But, particularly given that the 11 had always been kind of in the mix, and for all the reasons cited in the annual report, CUB certainly supports expanding the group size. Also supportive is clarity about the terms of the ex officio members being made year-round participants. The Blue Ribbon Commission had heard criticism of the fall-only timeline of BACs not really working for these bureaus, particularly given the extensive capital improvement planning. And so this contributed to a major finding that's reflected in the ordinance that the pub be the BAC and to include a staff person from the bureau to kind of meet the goal of the, is that okay?
That's okay. Keep
Okay.
going, please.
Unfortunately, there's not a huge crowd behind me, or
Problem. No problem.
so I think there's lots of reasons to clarify that the ex officio members should indeed be year-round, and they have been extremely helpful and very respectful of their kind of non-voting status. 2 comments on the annual report itself. On page 1, kind of the opening paragraph, it seems like it would have been good if that paragraph had, conveyed that the role of the pub is oversight of the city council's management of the bureaus. Obviously, there's lots of input that is being provided directly to the bureaus. But again, I think the BRC's focus on making these improvements was linked to decisions made in the past. I understand that, but that historically the problem has, in terms of some of the controversies, have definitely not been bureau decisions, it's been council decisions. And I think there could be just improvements clarifying that the pub is, yes, providing oversight to the bureaus, but is also clearly charged with oversight to the city council. And that just seems to be a little bit missing in that opening statement. Also want to note and support on page 6, the discussion about the communications with the city council. I think the Terminal 1 situation certainly clarified that a role for the pub includes providing oversight of the council, and definitely support the comments they make on that regard towards the bottom of page 6 and requests for improved engagement from the city council. At the same time, I have recommended that the pub also request its staff to monitor council agendas and provide regular reports to the pub on city council matters. A lot of routine things, go through, occur in these chambers, and I think it could be a good educational opportunity for the pub to hear from its staff person about kind of what's happening here, particularly, when points are made, by the public and whatnot. And the other thing I just need to mention is though, the Terminal 1 situation, and I think, it's, the recommendations that were made by both Pub and Cub that, it maybe could have been given a little bit more credence and more involvement in the lead up to that discussion. I obviously would be remiss in not mentioning that the City Council has heeded Cub's budget-related recommendations for both the 2015 and fiscal year 16-17 Utility Bureau budgets. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you.
Let me just, for a point of clarification, I think one of the comments you made on the Terminal 1 discussion had to do with whether the Bureau of Environmental Services was receiving fair market rent on the transaction. While the terms of a lease agreement have not been finalized, it's my understanding that the rent payments on whatever portion of the facility is used by the Housing Bureau will in fact be based on fair market rent. So while your testimony in the amendment didn't pass, your testimony did not cause the amendment that was offered to pass. In point of fact, in subsequent discussions among principals, the Housing Bureau has committed to paying fair market rent. The details to be worked out. So I still think your weighing in on that was very helpful.
That's good to know. I gather that because there's been covered in the press. But, I think another factor in that was a lawsuit, and it's kind of too bad that, the potential legal action potentially has to be a nudge to help along. The legal action, I think, could have been avoided. Let's put it that way. If there had been earlier action taken to heed oversight recommendations. Is that? So just an added twist.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Other questions? Thank you so much. Debbie?
I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. Can you hear it? Okay. The League opposed the 2014 ballot measure that would have removed management of the Water Bureau and BES from City Council. We did, however, support steps to strengthen oversight of Council's management of the bureaus. As regular observers of pub meetings, for example, we have recommended that the pub website clearly indicate its City Council oversight role. Sorry. Oh my God, I can't read that word of the pubs. Forget that. Oh, in terms of, this is what happens when you amend as you're sitting there. In terms of the pub's annual report, the League supports pub's recommendation for a larger board and for clarifying the role of ex officio members. The 3 ex officio members from BES and the Water Bureau are valuable contributors to pub discussions. They respect the difference between voting and ex officio membership, ask clarifying questions, and add context to the discussions. Year-round participation is important because issues affecting budgets, particularly capital improvement planning, require ongoing discussion throughout the year. The Blue Ribbon Commission recommended a 9 or 11-member pub. Starting with 9 was a worthy experiment, but given the workload, the need to accommodate absences, and the importance of adding a greater diversity of experience and backgrounds to the pub, we support the call for a larger board. Success also depends on City Council's continued and meaningful engagement with the pub and attention to its recommendations. Including pub and cub in council budget work sessions is a beneficial procedural element that should be continued. Because we strongly believe in the need for better oversight, the League is concerned that City Council's commitment to engagement with the pub and cub was not demonstrated in regard to Terminal 1. Separate from the pros and cons of the proposal, it is of great concern that the recommendations of both oversight groups received short shrift during the council discussion of setting the terms of the lease between BES and the Housing Bureau. Press reports indicate that the negotiations are continuing and obtaining a fair market value rent is now a goal, as Commissioner Fish just stated. It's problematic that reaching this goal appears to be motivated more by legal action than by the advice provided by the groups associated with the improved utility oversight system you created. City Council's disregard for input from Pub and Cub in the Terminal 1 case sends a troubling signal that the work to create a stronger oversight system for City Council decisions regarding utility ratepayer dollars was lip service. In closing, we support Council's adoption of Pub's annual report and urge you to be more diligent in providing timely information to Pub and Cub on potential City Council action and in heeding their future advice, even when threat of legal action is not involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, welcome.
Honorable Mayor, members, Richard Robinson. Because of your oversight responsibility, I feel it incumbent upon me. I've been actively involved for years in an anti-litter campaign, but a utility pole is not a kiosk. The visual cacophony in certain neighborhoods is overwhelming. One can see where, because of a lack of proper attention to simple housekeeping, a neighborhood has gone downhill because of the litter on the lampposts, the utility poles. Briefly, your utility board should be made aware of a growing problem. On Broadway at Grand, Morrison at 12, these are only two intersections that come to consciousness. It is a problem that can be solved, but it has to be solved expeditiously because some of these neighborhoods are really going downhill. Thank you.
Debbie, before you go, thank you for your written testimony. I just want to I want to state for the record that I support both of the proposed code changes. And I was trying to remember the conversation we had at the formation. And my recollection was that on the question of the ex officio members, there was some sensitivity about not surrounding the pub with too many people and therefore inadvertently dilute their autonomy. And so we, as a sort of an initial step, we said we would create these ex officio positions to have, in effect, a direct relationship with staff that had a lot of information, but we would tailor it to the budget season. I think a couple of things have changed. One is we've heard from the co-chairs that the budget season now actually lasts all year. I mean, we've effectively taken the Bureau budget committees and made them all year-round bodies serving with this kind of continuity of expertise. And two is that whatever concern we have about sort of the undue influence of ex officio members, the pub leadership says we want them there. So those two, for me, are the deciding factors as to why I think it makes sense. And I'm actually very pleased that they are viewed as resources for the pub to do their job better. So that's why I support this change and the other change. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak on these items? If not, then let's have a motion, please, on the report.
Move to accept the report.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Saltzman,
Thank you for this excellent report. I appreciate it very much. Aye.
Fritz,
A huge undertaking, and thanks again, Commissioner Fish, for bringing both utilities into very normalcy, a state of normalcy, which is very nice. Aye.
Fish,
I want to thank our co-chairs. Everybody on the pub gives freely of their time. The co-chairs have made an extra commitment to this process, and they provided us with thoughtful and stable leadership, so thank you. To Melissa Merrill, who has been noted, one of the analysts, colleagues, it was, I think, a very important decision that we made when we tried to learn from the from some of the weaknesses in the prior oversight process and creating this new process, the commitment that we made to providing ongoing staff. And the professional staff support that we ensured and are funding is one of the reasons I think that the pub has, on a fairly accelerated track, gotten up and running and has been having a significant impact on the quality of our work. So I want to thank Melissa. I also just want to acknowledge that that this was a work in progress, and I want to go back to the Blue Ribbon Commission and thank those citizen volunteers for taking the time to help us craft this new system. We knew that year one was going to be a year with a very steep learning curve. And if you look at the report, it really is quite amazing how this group jumped into the work and the kind of briefings they requested and the progress they've made. This next year, I think we're going to see this new relationship come to fuller flower. And what I anticipate, particularly at budget time, that instead of coming in and providing high-level review of our budget, we'll have an opportunity to go deeper, and particularly into areas like the 5-year CIP, which many other advisory groups have found a difficult nut to crack. And sometimes we hear the complaint, well, it's already cooked, what's our role? I think in year two, you're going to see tougher questions posed about priorities, both on the capital side and the operating side. And my commitment, as long as I have the honor of leading both bureaus, is you'll have the full cooperation of my bureaus in your work. And in that regard, Mayor and colleagues, I do want to thank the senior leadership and staff of both the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau, because they made a commitment to this process, and as you heard from the co-chairs, they followed through on that commitment. Thank you for an outstanding report, and we look forward to building on this relationship. Aye.
Else?
Well, I've had the chance as mayor to work in partnership with each of my colleagues on one or another shared initiatives, and this one has had several facets to it. That is the initiative of trying to restore the credibility of our city utility functions with the public. It's had several facets. Some were political, like having to beat back a hostile takeover ballot measure. Others have been administrative, like having professional staff assigned to the utility function, and then some are oversight in the form of the pub. And I think the fact that we have reached this new normal of proper administration, following the rules and having the general public know that that's what's happening is a really significant accomplishment. So Commissioner Fish, I appreciate the good work that you've done and that we've all done to get to this point. So more to come, and obviously having really effective citizen oversight of this function is not something we just needed for a little while. It's something we always need. So we're going to continue to depend on volunteers like you two and your colleagues on the pub that are willing to put your time into this process, just as we do with budget advisors and planning commissioners and other folks from the community that really invest themselves in the function of the city. So thank you, and well done all around. Aye. Okay, and then let's vote on the emergency ordinance to change the number of board members and make the other changes in the code.
Councilman
Aye.
Fritz?
I was particularly glad to hear Co-Chair Smith talk about the importance of public engagement and to read the reports in the section about some of the reasons for member turnover, the proposal to change meeting times to 4 to 6:30 to help build this as an institution, but also maybe to widen the number of people who might be able to make it, and your commitment to avoid midday meetings in particular. So I appreciate that. There's no one right answer, I don't think, on the timing issue, although when I was on the Planning Commission, we had one meeting a month at 12:30 and the other at 7, and that, so people could come to one or the other, and that might be something to consider. And I do appreciate the expanding the membership, and I'll think about who I might be able to recommend to you. And on that lines, I remember that Commissioner Judy Shiprack, when she was a state representative, was giving a presentation to young women about how to get involved. And she was recommending that people get involved in boards and commissions as a way to learn how to do things. And she said that she applied to be on the plumbing board, because although she knew nothing whatsoever about plumbing, she was a user of the system. So I think we all drink water and use our sewer system. So that opens it up to bright, sharp people who would be willing to do the work, who might not necessarily be subject experts. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about. Thank you very much. Aye.
I think these are two very sensible changes, and I endorse them enthusiastically. I also want to, though, acknowledge the work that the Citizens Utility Board is doing, and Janice Thompson in particular. Because in effect, when we launched this experiment, we got effectively two for the price of one. We have the pub and the cub working arm in arm from slightly different perspectives and with different levels of different histories to help us get it right. And Janice, in the last 6 months, was very creative in looking at the architecture of this and recommending changes. And I think there may be additional changes that we'll be considering in the future. But we really appreciate that partnership and having Janice at the table helping us get it right as well. So I want to thank you. Since the League of Women Voters is the only other party that testified today, thank you, Debbie, for taking the time and for always being here. The issue that was raised about the website seems to me to be a good one, and I think we can follow through on that and make sure that we get that right. And then I just want to, before I vote, close with some happy news. Colleagues, this week, the Water Bureau quietly relaunched AutoPay. And that means that you can go on the website and sign up for AutoPay, and you're going to see some new bells and whistles. And we're also about to, Kathy reminds me that we have some other surprises in store this fall that I think our customers will really appreciate. A huge technological challenge that had to be overcome to get to this point, but the numbers are very strong. And for those of you who like the convenience of AutoPay, it is now currently up and running. So we're very pleased. Thank you. Aye.
Thank you. I look forward to using AutoPay. Aye. And we're adjourned until next week.
Congratulations,
Yeah,
that
that's
is
great.
huge.